You see, King Saul here is semi-devoted because it's a story of him holding back the last 10%. He doesn't completely devote things to God, just the stuff he doesn't really want. Saul, like me, loves to pose devotion, loves to talk about how committed we are. But in reality, he, and unfortunately I, sometimes hold back the best 10%. So here in chapter 15 and 16, even though he consistently seems to repent, it's always doing it like for effect. In fact, a few verses down in verse 15, it says that when Samuel comes and confronts Saul about this, he finds him building a monument to himself. Isn't that a great phrase? A monument to himself. Well, that's pretense, and the Bible tells us that God despises the pretense of devotion. The prophet Amos, later in the Old Testament, Amos chapter 5, puts it this way, verse 21 through 24. I despise your feasts, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the peace offerings of your fattened animals, I won't even look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the melody of your harps I will not listen. Instead, let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. You see, God hates it when we pretend full devotion, but we hold the last 10% back. And that's exactly what's going on in this story of King Saul and the Amalekites. He pretends full devotion, but he keeps the best for himself. And you can see this conflict all over chapter 15, but it actually is reflected in many places in the Old Testament. In fact, one of the most mysterious words, most difficult for us to translate into our modern culture, is the Old Testament Hebrew word cherem. Cherem meant to fully devote. In fact, you can look at translations. They try and figure out how to translate it different. The ESV here, in verse 3, the first time it uses it, it translates it, devote to destruction. And that's kind of what cherem means. It means give it over to God by completely taking it off the table for yourself. In the Old Testament, when God would choose to call something cherem or ask it to be devoted, it was to be utterly destroyed, banned for other uses, sacrificed to God only, to demonstrate full devotion. From God's perspective, to be devoted was to say, I will give the last 10%, the full 100% to God. In other words, that's what he means when he says, devote these things to me. Don't use them for personal gain. In fact, warfare in ancient times was all about a word that sometimes gets used as booty, B-O-O-T-Y, booty. We've used it in weirder ways today, but the booty was the stuff I could get, and that's how you got soldiers to fight for you. The conquered people, all their stuff was free for them. If you could conquer another tribe as a warrior, you get to keep their cattle, their sheep, their gold, their silver. Their women become your concubines. Their children become your slaves. So war was primarily fought, not because they paid the army or drafted the army, but because of personal gain. People would join the army knowing I can get rich by doing this. It was a profit motive. They were hoping to profit from their war. But here we have a different kind of prophet, like the prophet Samuel, who gives a different motive, and he tells Israel, no. You will not go to war against the Amalekites so that you can get rich, so you can gain off them. You will devote, utterly devote, destroy completely, and devote to God everything. Don't steal their stuff. You see, Samuel wanted to know that the nations would see Israel was different. They didn't fight wars for personal gain. They they fought wars in obedience to their God. So Samuel's saying, you got to tell the world, you got to show each other that you're fully devoted. Now, this is, again, one of the hardest things for some people about the Old Testament, this idea that certain tribes or people or even nations, seemingly innocent people, get devoted to God. But you have to see the context. God wanted his people to be different. He didn't want them fighting wars for personal gain. He wanted full devotion.